Thank you. I'm Nathanael King, and I'm here to talk to you this morning about contemporary literary trends in secondary education, or in simpler terms, the way literature affects students. Some of these trends are dangerous, others beneficial, and still others merely intriguing. Now, the three trends we'll be focusing on are ebooks, book banning, and the actual content of the books. Since it's one of the most visibly changing areas of literature today, we'll start with ebooks. They're a pretty divisive subject among book lovers, and I'm sure that most of you in the audience either love them or hate them. But in the spirit of optimism, we'll start with the good. Efficiency. It's clear that ebooks are simply more efficient. They cost less to produce, they're environmentally friendly, and they're easier to store. They don't fall apart, they have functions such as search engines and dictionaries, and they're accessible. They can be circulated around the globe with little to no effort from the reader. So while they're clearly the easy choice, they have some pretty serious detriments too. If you ask someone what they think of an ebook and they're not a fan, they're likely to argue it doesn't look like a book and it doesn't feel like a book. And this is perfectly valid as a matter of opinion, but does it hold any practical truth? And the answer is yes for two reasons: annotation and navigation. For now at least, we just can't mark up an ebook the same way we can take notes in a print book, and that's a problem, particularly in the classroom. And we can't flip through an ebook to search for an illustration or a vaguely remembered passage. There's also a spatial connection that's created when information is on individual pages rather than the same screen. Critical thinking and content absorption are both improved when we have a short time for reflection. So believe it or not, those couple of seconds you spend turning the page actually do matter. Enhanced ebooks have been shown to be particularly bad for children. Studies at the Joan Gans Cooney Center have shown that these ebooks with embedded videos or interactive content greatly decrease children's recollection of the actual story. And this brings us to the part of the ebook debate that's most often overlooked, but in my opinion is also the most important aspect. What are the rights of the reader? DRM, or digital rights management, is a technology meant to prevent media piracy, but in reality, it locks your ebooks so that you don't actually own them. DRM-locked ebooks can't be shared unconditionally, they can't be resold, you just don't own it. And privacy is also a massive issue here, because if you want to buy an ebook anonymously, you're really out of luck. The information required to buy an ebook is going on record, whether you like it or not. And this last bit is a good segue for our next topic, which is book censorship. In 2009, Amazon discovered that one of their Kindle editions of George Orwell's 1984, ironically, had an invalid copyright. So rather than just removing it from their online store, they remotely deleted copies that users had already purchased without notifying them. Obviously, this didn't go over well, and while they've promised not to do it again, the issue is that they still can. So clearly the idea of companies censoring what we read is appalling, but it's still very controversial whether or not adolescents and children should have access to all books. The books in schools and school libraries are constantly being challenged over their content. And as you can see up here, the two most common reasons for a challenge are explicit sexuality and profanity, with violence only coming in fifth. But here's where it gets interesting. In a focus group with children ages 9 to 12, most children reported that they did actually feel that they should be shielded from some content. However, only once did any of them mention sexuality, and profanity went completely without mention. What they were offended by was violence. These kids had their priorities together more than a lot of adults. Violence is abhorrent to us by nature, but they weren't concerned with sex, homosexuality, profanity, or religious differences. So who is? The parents. The majority of all of these challenges in schools are made by parents. Children are taught to be offended by these things we call obscene when authority figures hide them away from them. But when the only thing that's naturally obscene are these gratuitous acts of human violence. But we don't have to hide it away for kids to recognize that. It's already understood. In fact, when we hide away sexuality or the understanding of violence, they have a warped development. As many of you probably know, the Victorian era was one of immense sexual repression, but the result was what many modern people would consider abounding sexual depravity. So this brings us to our last question, which is what's going to happen when we do allow students access to these books with all these mature, complicated themes? What's it going to give them? Answers. It gives them answers. And the truly valuable thing about these answers is that we don't have to ask a question to receive them. Because in today's society, we're told by our friends, by the media, that we're supposed to understand these things already. We're supposed to know all about violence, sex, drugs, and what we think about them. That girl whose father didn't come back from the war, she's supposed to know what to think about the loss, about the government that sent him, and about the hate she's probably feeling. The boy who's never really been attracted to girls, but hears all his friends call each other fags and queers, he's supposed to know what to think, but he can't ask his friends because he's supposed to understand these things already. And the prospect of looking inside yourself to find these answers is daunting at best, because it requires us to admit that we don't have the answers in the first place. And let's face it, that's a scary thought. So what these obscene books about foul-mouthed soldiers, about junkies and teenagers in the midst of sexual exploration do is give answers to children too frightened to ask anyone a question. And there's a lot of forces today that threaten to take that away, be they corporations, technological advances, or just misled parents. And that's not acceptable, because failure to protect these resources means leaving a lot of kids lost and confused without the tools to find their way. The defense of intellectual freedom in literature and of readers' rights as technology presses forward, these fights are vastly important to the development and education of our students. Thank you.